Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to the department officials for coming in. Mr. Ryan, and you can send this to me. What you're saying is TB goes from cattle to cattle. Have you done any tests where there be 50 cattle, we'll say 45 clean cattle, and you put 5 cattle with TB into a shed? Have you scientific analysis done or proof that the cattle are spreading it cattle to cattle in that situation? Second of all, my second question is, when an animal is put down with the farmer, obviously they go to the factory. Is there a scientific test or a sample? Does it go to England or somewhere for each individual animal? And does that come back with no TB in it or with TB in it, even if the animal is put down? And what steps is taken if there's no TB in it? Is the farmer basically clear? The farm organisations expressed their dismay at the letter that went out earlier on the year. They said it was a solar run. Is that in the spirit of partnership to go on a solar run the way it was done earlier on in the year? In the line of the department, when an animal goes down, you get an option to take out whatever, there's 3 valuers or whatever. I've seen instances, and a lot of them lately, where the first person went out and the department would refuse the figure. The second person would go out and they actually price the animal higher, and the department then goes back to the first figure. Why are ye basically judge and executor of the whole situation when you did look for a second analysis or a second price? And why is the appeals gone so slow? In the line of the people in the small farms, obviously you understand, coming from the Department of Agriculture, the small beef farmers are struggling, or suckler farmers. They have off-farm jobs to keep maybe a mortgage paid in the house and keep the family going. But for whatever reason, when an animal goes down, they're not entitled to get the hardship fund. Why is that when it's completely away from the situation in the line of that they're a small farm, they're not getting a monstrous payment or anything? Why is that in that situation? And the last question I have for ye is, in your opinion, and Mr. Ryan, you might be have looked at this, I have seen herds going down where there was zero grazing going on, and the gates and that wouldn't let in badgers around the farm, and an awful lot of the herd went down. Is it that there's manure from the badger, or what's the reason on the fresh grass coming in and the zero graze? Is there a worry there, or have you come to any analysis on that? Thank you.
A number of questions there, so I'll hand over to the officials there to see who wants to answer.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come in relation to the first point raised, which is about the success of the failure of the TB programme itself. And I suppose we should remember what the TB programme was set out to do back in 1956 or whenever. And fundamentally, the purpose of the programme was to have the necessary national herd health status to allow us to trade, and so that we can can start to export and continue to export. And in that sense, I mean, the TB programme plays an important role. Clearly, it hasn't. It has failed to eradicate it, but in the context of our strategy, the strategy that has been drawn up through discussion and consultation, and which now sets a pathway forward, a roadmap, if you like, where we can drive towards eradication over the next 10 years. And that does take extra actions. I think it's been mentioned already in relation to, where we're going, that doing the same things won't necessarily get there. But what we do need to do is to look at what other countries have achieved. We know the policy frameworks they had. They are available to us. And what we need to do now, and when I say we, we're talking about all the stakeholders, the farmers, the department, all together, the farm organisations. We need to look at the extent and bandwidth of the toolkit and policies that are out there, and we need to be able to apply them as appropriate to drive us towards eradication. So I think that's really, if you like, the way forward in the context of the scheme. I'm going to hand over to my colleague again in relation to the samples for reactors at factories and various other things.
Thank you, Ms Walsh. Mr Ryan.
Right. Thank you, Chair. So I might just preface my remarks by saying that there are a lot of technical questions about TB, and they come up very frequently. We do a lot. Well, before COVID-19, we did a lot of public meetings, a lot of farm organisation meetings. We'd be in village halls. We would talk to co-ops and county councils, and we talk to anybody who seeks a meeting, and we try to provide information as much as we can. And we've a range of leaflets, which of course we don't physically give out now due to the pandemic, but they're on the website. We have videos on YouTube on the department's channel, and we have a list of frequently asked questions. So a lot of these questions do come up again and again, and we try to provide this because it is confusing for farmers when suddenly you're hit with all this stuff coming from all sides. So just to get to the specific questions, has cattle-to-cattle spread of TB been conclusively shown? Yes, it has. That's been shown many times over the years. So I don't think there's
scientific proof of that, where there was 50 cattle put in a shed, 45 of them clear and 5 of them reactors. Have you done a simple test like that to a scientific test, and where is that available?
Well, I mean, I haven't put 45 cattle in a shed with 5 others, but certainly there's been many transmission experiments done going back 100 years. This has been established back at I suppose the first part of the 20th century, and it's been shown in recent years by whole genome sequencing, which I suppose now we're all familiar with from COVID-19. There's no doubt at all about it, but Deputy Fitzmaurice, I'd be certainly happy to have my team supply you with a scientific review of this. In fact, I think Professor Simon Moore from UCD appeared before the Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture last year, I think, or possibly 2019, and outlined a lot of this. So his paper summarises some of that. So, but we'd be happy to go into as much detail, and we'll be happy to provide further if you'd like. But in any case, cattle-to-cattle spread of TB, there's no doubt that it happens. The next issue, samples when animals go to a factory. So when animals that are not thought of TB go to a factory and a suspect lesion is discovered, that lesion is taken and it's sent to our Central Veterinary Research Lab in Backweston. It's the National Reference Lab for TB. That's tested to see, is it something else or is it TB? And where it's TB, the herd is restricted. Where it's not TB, they're de-restricted. When there's reactors, about 1/3 of reactors will have lesions. And this is a continuing issue that we need to communicate better on. And it's one of the things that we do try to communicate better on, because I think collectively the veterinary profession have done a poor job in the last 100 years of conveying to farmers that just because you can't see the bacteria doesn't mean it's not there. So you look at your hands, for instance, we all know there's bacteria there. You can't see them. Cattle can be infected with TB without it being visible. But 1/3 of them, the disease has progressed to the stage where you can see the rotten flesh, actual tubercular flesh, like you see back in pictures of people back in the days when TB was tragically too common. And one of the problems we have is when we say things like, oh, that animal had lesions, people infer from that the animals that don't have lesions don't have TB, but actually they do. It's just that in most cases, we catch the animal because we do annual testing before the flesh has started putrefying and rotting. But back in the old days, say in the 1940s or 50s, when we had 27% of cows were TB positive, it would have been very, very common to have visible lesions. So, we regularly get comments on that. On the zero grazing issue, there's a number of reasons why a farm that does zero grazing can get infected, and you touched on several of them, and I agree with you. For instance, even if the herd and the yard is badger-proofed, if, say, the silage is collected, if there is contamination by badger latrines in the field from which the grass is taken, and if those badgers have TB, because remember, not all badgers have TB, but if it's an area where the badgers do, that can bring it in. Sometimes also badgers can be, a dead badger might be caught in a feeder wagon. Also, you can have residual infection. So if an animal in that herd was infected with TB 6 or 7 years ago in a previous herd, since then she was sold into this herd, or maybe it's that herd last had a breakdown 5 or 6 years ago. Unfortunately, it's one of the failings of the skin test that because it relies on your functioning immune system, an animal can be infected and some of them will not test positive. In fact, the skin test misses on average about 20% of infected cattle, and this is why one of the reasons why we have this residual population. And the same as some people get infected with TB as kids and then years later they develop the disease, some cattle can become infected at a younger stage in their life, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later the disease recrudesces and they spread it to their comrades. and it's only then that could be discovered. So it could be residual infection. It could also be bought in. There's 2.8 million cattle movements a year in Ireland, and there's no doubt that a proportion of those, a small proportion of those, are likely to include infected cattle, particularly those coming from herds with a history of TB, for the reason I've just outlined, that even if there's 2 clear tests, that means the herd is free to trade, but it's not a guarantee that none of those animals have TB, because unfortunately the test is not perfect. And the final
the leisure and the pricing of the cattle and the appeals. What's the story?
So I might deal with the letter on my colleague. I might hand over to my colleague Colin Ford for evaluation. So on the letter, the letter was based on a recommendation of the TB Forum, and I might, if I may, Chair, just read out a sentence just to demonstrate that this was recommended in the TB Forum report. And I'm reading from page 6 now. Provision of biosecurity advice to farmers should include detailed biosecurity advice to assist farmers reducing the potential risk posed by introduced cattle. And then it says here, we should develop revised risk categories which are simple, clear and survey efficient information, print them on BTB related correspondence, and include a summary of BTB history and inward movement since the herd for the previous 5 years. So it's based on a clear recommendation of the TB Forum. But one of the things we're doing is very much taking on board the feedback and the feedback from the farm organisations. And we've a clear commitment in the new strategy that communications like this to enable farmers to reduce their own risk and to protect their own herd will be agreed with the TB Forum.
Just put it clear, they knew about this, so what you're saying?
It's in the TB Forum report,
okay.
And I've quoted from it there.
Can you just touch on the other, because there's other people to talk. I just want to make sure about the people working, why they don't get compensation, and so about the pricing of the cattle, what's gone wrong there, that the department are basically judge and executioner of every farmer.
So I might hand over to my colleague Colin Ford for that, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chairman. I might just elaborate a little bit more on Owen's point. One of the key fundamentals of the National Farmed Animal Health Strategy is to focus on prevention is better than cure. I think Senator Daly focused on it with the first question of the night. How can we help more herds prevent TB incidents in their herds? And it's a constant criticism that the programme has had over many decades. So providing additional information to herd owners to help them inform their own risk is really a fundamental part of the programme. And we also have commissioned the ESRI to do a behavioural study on how we can influence farmers to help them make positive behaviour change to reduce risk. We all see with COVID the different changes that we're asked to do to try and limit disease transmission. So the concepts are quite similar. In terms of the question specifically from Deputy Fitzmaurice, the on-farm market valuation system that we have in place allows for a live valuation on your farm of your reactor animal. That's carried out by an independent valuer. And then at that point, the herd owner or the department can appeal that valuation and ask for a second valuation. I don't have the most recent statistics to hand, but the last time I looked at them, 97% of first valuations were accepted by herd owners. And I think by any fair measure, that would indicate a broad level of positive acceptance of the farmers of the scheme.
But I'm asking you, Colin, just to be clear, why, when the department didn't agree with it, that they got a second valuation? I've seen this on a number of occasions. And then they didn't agree with the second one because it was higher than the first one. And then they decided to go back to the first one when the farmer cannot do that.
He can, Deputy. So the both parties have the ability to reject either the first or the second valuation. So a farmer can also reject the second valuation and request that it goes to arbitration. I think it's important to say that out of the 23,000 reactors we had last year, I would say a very small number of those go to arbitration. So we're talking about a very small number of cases. And I think you referred earlier that those arbitration hearings aren't happening. And I confirmed that those are occurring virtually. So they have gone ahead.
Not person to person.
Michael, sorry.
I mean, in the current environment, Deputy, I don't think that could be facilitated. But just to reference that, one of the things that came out of the TB stakeholder forum, farm bodies had some concerns with the on-farm market valuation system. And with their input, we agreed to terms of reference for an independent review of the system. And that was carried out by Grant Thornton. And that was actually the subject of discussion at last week's finance group meeting with the forum members. So we have a number of recommendations which we can work through there. But I think it's fair to say Grant Thornton's overall review basically said that the on-farm market valuation system as it currently stands is broadly a good model, and that the recommendations they have are relative tweaks to it. I think one of the points that a number of the farm bodies touched on earlier was this level of frustration with getting reactor cattle off the farm as quickly as possible. And that's something that we're very keen to work on. I think when Grant Thornton looked at this scheme, they said that really the cause of the significant delay is the fact that we have a live valuation. Someone physically goes out onto your farm and you have a number of days in to accept it, and there's the post over and back.
Okay, Mr.
And if we
Ford.
really want to make progress on that, it's through an automated valuation. So we'll work through
Mr.
that
Ford.
with the farm organisations.